something like this is said. There are four different kinds of parables: how the kingdom comes, how the kingdom grows, discipleship in the kingdom, and the consummation of the kingdom, that kind of thing. Because the parables are mostly all about the kingdom. And in most of the parables, books on the parables that I have read, there is not a significant treatment given to the fact that Jesus actually told parables about himself. In fact, one of the points that's often made in discussions of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the synoptic gospels, is that Jesus didn't talk much about himself. And I guess that's true, especially if you compare Matthew, Mark, and Luke to John. He doesn't talk much about himself. Not like he does in John, where he says, I am the good shepherd, I am the way, the truth, the life, I'm the resurrection and the life, I am living water, etc. I guess you have to admit that in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus is never the principal object of what he's teaching. He's teaching about the kingdom of God, about our relationship with God. But he does talk about himself, especially in Luke chapter 15. And it's interesting. The whole thing, the whole chapter is kind of tied together. Usually when we look at the parables in Luke chapter 15, we look at one parable, and that's the parable of the lost son, or the prodigal son. But the parable of the prodigal son is only a part of the parables that are told in this chapter. And the whole thing is kind of set up for us in the first two verses. Luke 15, 1 and 2. It says, Now all the tax collectors and the sinners were coming near to listen to him, and the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them. So the point in the first two verses is the scene is set for what's going to happen here. And there are how many groups of people? Will you guys help me out with this? In the first two verses, we're introduced to groups of people, and I want you to identify them. First we've got Jesus. Huh? Then we've got tax collectors and what? And then the third group is what? The Pharisees and the scribes. So let's read the first parable. It starts in verse 3. So he told them this parable. Which one of you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? When he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders and he rejoices. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, Rejoice with me, I found my sheep that was lost. Just so, I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. So, parable number 1 is the lost sheep. And I'm going to name these people. We've got the seeker, the sinner, and the critic. In this lost sheep parable, how many of these characters do we have in this making an appearance in the story? Is the seeker there? Yeah, the seeker is there. He's the shepherd. The sinner, is the sinner there? Who's the sinner? The lost sheep. Is the critic there? No, I don't think so either. Okay, so parable number 1, the lost sheep. Jesus is telling stories about seeking lost things. That's what this is all about. And he tells a simple story about a shepherd looking after a lost sheep. And when he finds the sheep, he's really happy. And there's lots of joy when the sheep is found. In fact, he throws a party when the sheep is found. Parable number 2 is another lost item parable. Or what woman having 10 silver coins, if she loses one of them, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? When she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, "Rejoice with me, I found the coin that I lost." Just so, I tell you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. So here's number 2. A lady loses a coin, maybe it's a $100 bill, groceries for the week. She freaks out, tears her house upside down until she finds the coin, and she's really thrilled when she finally finds it. Invites her friends over, and they throw a party. Who is in this parable of the 3? The seeker. It's the woman, right? Who's the sinner? Okay, the lost coin. Is the critic there? No. So far, we've just got 2 parables about looking for lost things. The assumption is the lost things have value, and the logical reaction after you find these lost things of value is you're happy. It's normal to be happy when you find something that you've lost. You guys ever lost anything important and then found it? You're lucky. I've lost things and never found it. Have you ever lost your billfold with money, check, credit cards, driver's license? Anybody lost their? I did. I never found it. I never find anything. Well, I have before, but... So what'd you lose?
Me?
Yes, what did you lose?
Well, it was more, I lost, like, I don't know, a bunch of money from a vacation, and then I found, like, a year later stuff in my jean jacket.
You found it later in your jacket?
Like, it ended up being in my jacket. I was like, oh my gosh, this is great.
What'd you lose?
I lost my wallet in Heritage a couple weeks ago, and I like lost it.
So you've done this recently, huh? Your billfold?
Yeah, I had my credit card.
And somebody actually found it and kept it for you? That happened to my daughter once. She lost her purse. We went to wash my truck at one of these car washes, and she got out to help me, and I don't know why she put her purse outside, but she left her purse there, and she'd just gotten it. I mean, this was like 5 years ago. She was fairly small, and it was a birthday present from her brother, and she just loved it, and then she lost it. She cried and cried and cried, and we lived like an hour away, and she didn't realize she lost it until we got an hour away. And I said, Regina, I'll drive back there right now and see if I can find it. I drove back there, and the guy who runs that car wash place found it and put it in his office. She was so happy. She was so happy. That's the normal reaction, isn't it? You find something that means a lot to you, and you look, tear the place apart to find it. And when you find it, you're really happy. This is normal. These stories are very, very normal. Jesus is really sort of setting the scene for his critique of his critics. Because what they are criticizing him for doing is looking for lost souls. Looking for people who have been lost along the way. He has come to be the seeker. And they're criticizing him for hanging out with these people, for showing compassion to them, for giving preferential treatment to them. He has meals with them, and they don't like that. They don't like that he's eating with them. So Jesus just says, okay, a couple of scenarios for you. Lost sheep, found, happy. Lost coin, found, happy. This is normal, okay? This is normal. Now, can you imagine anyone being angry about this? But some people were. This group right here. They were criticizing his behavior and his seeking. And that's why the parable of the lost son is the most important parable in this trilogy. And it's frequently a point that we miss when we read the parable of the lost son. Because the parable of the lost son is the only one of the three told in chapter 15 that actually includes these characters in the story. The only one. So let me read the parable to you. Maybe you've heard it recently, but you can never hear this parable too much. Then Jesus said, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me a share of the property that will belong to me.' So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all that he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to the fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I know what I'll do. I'll get up and go to my father, and I'll say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like a slave. So he set off and went to his father. While he was still a long ways away, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. And he ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his slaves, Quickly bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger, sandals on his feet. Get the fatted calf and kill it, and let's eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead, and he's alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. There's a lot of cool things about this story so far. One is that the younger son was had obviously done something very mean to his father. He had asked his father while he was still alive for his inheritance, which is like asking his father for his inheritance as though he were dead. I can't imagine, you guys, when you're fathers, you will understand how this might have been, how the father might have felt on the other end of this. Most of us empathize with the younger son because we've all done things we're ashamed of. He finds himself very ashamed of where he ends up. He's blown all the money. Now he doesn't even have food to eat. He's lusting after food that the pigs are eating. And he decides that he's going to swallow his pride, go back to his father, apologize, and ask just if he can be a servant in his house, not a son. He's got this whole speech prepared and rehearsed. And it's not like it's artificial. I've heard some people say that the younger son never repented. I think personally that he did. I think that there's evidence everywhere here that this younger son has repented and is returning. But it's interesting, when he goes back to his father sees him, and halfway through the son's speech, he stops him. He doesn't even give him a chance to say, just take me back as a servant. Doesn't even give him a chance. Throws a ring on his finger, a robe on him, tells his servants to kill the fatted calf, and they party. And that's how far we've gotten so far. And that sort of parallels both of these stories. The younger son is back. He was lost. He's been found. Let's party. I should have brought that song by Toby Mac. Let's get this party started. Because that's what I think about when I read these. That's what I think about when I read these stories. Really, next time you hear that song, think about these parables. Isn't that what Jesus is saying? Let's get this party started. Now verse 25. Now his elder son was in the field. And when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and said, "What's going on?" He replied, "Your brother, you know the one, he's come back. And your father has killed the fatted calf because he has got him back safe and sound." Can you believe that? Then he became angry and he refused to go in. So here we've got the older brother, comes back to the house and just won't even go in. Okay? It's kind of a sidebar here that's interesting. what they're doing inside the house is they're eating, okay? And what the older brother refuses to do is go in and eat with them. It's very important because a lot of the criticism that Jesus received during his life was for the people he ate with. In fact, this whole business of food and how you eat, when you eat, who you eat with, what you do before you eat, blah, blah, blah. It was very important in the first century Jewish world, and I want to show you in a few minutes. Spencer, would you close that door, please? I want to show you in a few minutes some other parables that Jesus told about meals. And then finally I want you to begin thinking about how much of the stuff in Jesus' life had to do with food. It's kind of nice, isn't it? We all love food. So anyway, he comes back angry and refuses to go in. So his father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, "Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you." Both of these sons picture themselves as slaves to their father. The younger son as a slave and glad to be there. The older son as a slave who has been obedient to his father with no apparent reward at all. So both of these sons have the perspective of being servants or slaves, but their attitude about it is totally different. That's an important point here, I think. I've been working like a slave for you. I've never disobeyed your command, yet you have never given me even a goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, he calls him this son of yours, doesn't even call him his brother. When this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, and we don't know that for sure, the older brother just sort of slipped that in. You killed the fatted calf for him. Despicable. Don't you have any honor? Then the father said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours." But we had to celebrate and rejoice because, notice how he refers to them. This brother of yours. The older brother wanted to call him your son, and the father threw it back in his face and said, "This brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found." That's, guys, why this parable is so important. Because in this parable, we have a seeker. Who is the seeker? Huh? It's the Father? It's the Father. Most of us have thought, haven't we, that in this parable the Father represents God? And maybe that is one way of reading this. But specifically, in its direct application here, the Father is the seeker, is Jesus. So Jesus makes an appearance in this parable as the Father, the one seeking. But I guess it's fair to say that he represents God the Father also. The sinner is the younger son. And finally, in the parable, we have an appearance of the critic. And this parable, I think, fairly successfully reveals how petty and jealous and egocentric and and crude and mean it is to treat people who need to be found like they wanted them to be treated. So the point of all three parables is that they are primarily told by Jesus to defend his ministry, his behavior, what he was doing. And I think it's a pretty powerful defense. The whole thing kind of leads into a discussion of another parable, because this parable, these three parables sort of began as a response to Jesus' criticism for the people that he ate with and that he hung out with. And so a lot of this had to do with food. And it's amazing, if you think about it, how much you can learn about Jesus by watching him eat. You guys ever thought about this? We don't usually imagine that much can be learned about Jesus by watching him eat. I mean, how could that possibly help us understand the historical Jesus? But actually, it works pretty well. Try it sometime. Try going through Matthew, Mark, and Luke and noticing all of the things that happen related to food and eating and meals. It's pretty amazing. So we could almost write a theology of Jesus based upon watching him eat. So here is an example of further comments by Jesus about eating. Even the Lord's Supper, the last memorable event with his disciples, was a meal. There's lots of parables told about eating. This one here is on page 106 in the course pack. It's from Luke chapter 7, verses 31 to 35. And Matthew chapter 11, verses 16 through 19. If you have your course pack, why don't you turn there? Because what I have done on the course pack is I have showed you how one of the sayings of Jesus contains a series of references to a certain group of people. The passage quoted in Luke on page 106 is Luke chapter 14, verses 12 through 14. Jesus says, "When you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your rich neighbors, just in case they might invite you in return, and you would be repaid. But rather, when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind." Now, many of you might think, as you're reading through this, that there's no real significance attached to this group of people, this list, but there is. Because this list of words, this list of references to sort of a marginalized group, refers or is quoted in Leviticus chapter 21, verses 17 through 21. and also in a passage in the Dead Sea Scrolls called the Rule of the Community. The Rule of the Community is a document from the Scrolls where a lot of the details about the group that lived at Qumran can be found. The rules for joining the community, the rules that you have to live by once you get there, things of that nature. So in Luke we have the poor, crippled, lame, and blind. In Leviticus we've got the blind, the lame, the blemished, and those with an injured foot or hand. In the rule of the community, the group is referred to as those paralyzed in feet or hands, the lame, the blind, and it's even longer, the deaf, the dumb, and those with blemish. Do you see what I see? We have a reference in all three of these passages to a group of people who are, at least in Leviticus and the rule of the community, who are excluded from participation in meals. Leviticus reads this way: "Say to Aaron, no one of your offspring throughout their generations who has a blemish may approach to offer the food of his God. For no one who has a blemish shall draw near, one who is blind or lame, or one who has an injured foot or an injured hand." This is from the Leviticus Code. From the rule of the community, it reads, "No man defiled by any of the impurities of a man shall enter the assembly of these," meaning the community. "Everyone who is defiled in his flesh, paralyzed in his feet or hands, lame, blind, deaf, dumb, or defiled in his flesh with a blemish visible to the eye, these shall not enter the congregation, for the angels of holiness are among the congregation." Now this sounds harsh, doesn't it? It sounds harsh, but let me explain to you why they had these kinds of restrictions. The meal, especially the sacrificial meal referred to in Leviticus, was considered to be a sacred, holy event. And inasmuch as they excluded certain people who were disfigured or lame or damaged humans, inasmuch as they excluded these, they were preserving the basic symbolism of these meals. And the basic symbol of the meals was the holiness of God. That's what these represented, the holiness of God. The very same reason exists from where I come from, in Nebraska. People in Nebraska, in a farming community, they dress up on Sunday mornings because Sunday is a holy day. And if you come to church on Sunday, there, dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, or if you just got off work and you smell, if you took no trouble at all to make your appearance special for this day, then you would be offending them. It would be offensive. Because Sunday represents a holy day for them, and their way of showing that is dressing up. That's where I'm from. In Southern California, you can wear anything you want to church and nobody cares. You can wear a suit, or you can wear shorts and anything. Well, you can't go naked, because I've never seen that yet. But the significance of this is the basic symbolism of this meal was that it represented the holiness of God. And the closest that I can come to giving you a modern analogy is this dressing up on Sunday. Maybe you guys can think of a better example. But that works pretty well for me, because I know that a lot of my aunts and uncles and grandparents, they dress up on Sunday out of respect. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. But if you come and aren't dressed up and they treat you, badly, it's because you have offended the sacredness of their event. Okay? Do you understand that? And that's why they were offended with Jesus' behavior. Okay? I think that this is the logical explanation for why Jesus' behavior offended them. Because you don't eat with these kinds of people, because the meal represents the holiness of God. That's why there were so many rules about eating. It was so important that you do certain things before you eat, that you only eat at certain times of the day, that you don't eat at certain times of the day or week. There's lists of can do, can't do regarding food and meals. And Jesus just seemed to skate over some of these things, and he offended them. But the point, or at least the perspective that Jesus had when he looked at this, and especially read this passage, because if you read this passage after you read these, you realize that Jesus is being boldly, blatantly critical of this religious tradition. Look at what he says. When you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your rich neighbors, in case they may invite you in return. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor. Does this sound weird? Yeah, it should. It should sound. Maybe it doesn't to us because we don't understand how everybody else was thinking. This is how they were thinking. You don't invite those people. And Jesus says, yeah, you do invite those people. Invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed. So what happened here? I mean, didn't Jesus understand this? Surely if Jesus would have understood the purpose of this exclusive table fellowship, then he would have done it too. Is that the problem? Or is it something different than that? Maybe Jesus is taking the meal and changing the symbolism. Maybe for Jesus, the reason that he picked meals to fight all of his battles, and a lot of the battles that he fights are over food and meals. Who he eats with, who he eats with, what he does before he eats, what he doesn't do. Some of the things that he doesn't do, like in Mark chapter 7, when he doesn't wash his hands properly. Maybe what Jesus is up to in picking this battle is that he's out to change the basic symbolism of food and eating, because he makes it one of the most notable points of his ministry. I think if I can give you some examples. Zacchaeus, the tax collector. As soon as he called Zacchaeus out of the tree. You guys ever heard, when you were little kids, did you sing that song? How does that go? Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. He sat up in the tree. It's the Lord he wanted to see. How does it go then? Jesus saw him and he said, Zacchaeus. He said, what? Zacchaeus, you come down, because I'm going to your house today. So he calls Zacchaeus down out of the tree, and he says, we're going to your house right now and eat. Well, guys, if you were used to this symbolism, and along comes a Jewish prophet who insists on eating with you, what is that going to communicate to you? So instead of thinking about this group of people and what it meant to them, think about this group of people and what it meant to them. If the exclusive eating habits symbolized the holiness of God, what would inclusive eating habits symbolize? If you knew that you were considered unclean, and a prophet came up to you and said, I want to share a meal with you. And you knew that that would leave him unclean. What does that all say to you? Come on, it's not that hard. The basic symbolism that's what Jesus does with this. And I think he went to a lot of trouble in his life to make sure that this event, this meal, was changed in its symbolism to represent forgiveness and compassion I think it was one of the major victories that he fought in his life, and that it provides us with one of the fundamental insights into boy, there's a lot of coming and going today. It provides us with one of the fundamental insights into Jesus and what he was about. If someone said to you, "What is Jesus all about?" what would you say? This is what you'd say. He was about seeking those who had been left and lost. And he was about establishing that the most important thing in the kingdom of God is forgiveness and compassion. It goes all the way back, guys, to when we were talking about the relationship between Jesus and the Pharisees. Remember how many similarities there were between Jesus and the Pharisees? But do you remember the one significant difference between them? The Pharisees were defensive in regards to purity. They were constantly worried about something leaving them impure. So they were very protective, protecting their own purity. Jesus, on the other hand, was very offensive. Jesus acted as though other impure things weren't going to infect him, but he was going to infect them. Defensive, offensive. Protective, aggressive. Jesus was very aggressive, very, very offensive. And I don't mean offensive, I mean offensive. He was in the front. And he didn't operate from a position of fear of impurity. He operated from the position of conquering impurity wherever he went. And he did it with these kinds of things, replacing the symbolism of meals with God's holiness, from God's holiness to God's forgiveness. That's what meals should be for us as Christians. I mean, it's possible to get pedantic about this and even maybe ridiculously picky, but I think that it's a good idea for us to use meals with other people as an opportunity to demonstrate acceptance of them. It might affect the people you eat with, the people you invite to meals. Worked pretty well for Jesus. Here's another point I think we can take from this. We have things in our religious traditions, the way that we are religious, the way we worship, things like that. Some of the things that we value in our religion, we value them because they reflect God's holiness. And I think Jesus would say that's okay as long as nobody gets hurt in the process. But if you're hurting people while you're doing that, then stop it now. Because we're not into that. And there's nothing right about it. There's nothing good about a religious tradition that's symbolic of purity if it ends up hurting people, pushing them away. That's what he's doing with this tradition right here. He's changing it fundamentally because it's hurting a lot of people. What else? Well, I'll leave it up to you guys. Next time you read through a gospel, just watch Jesus eat, okay? Just do that. Just pick something as unprofound as watching him eat. And I think we can learn a lot about him by watching him eat. I'm going to let you go early today. On Thursday, would you please pass your